Hello, and welcome to The Mind of a Therapist, a podcast where I interview psychotherapists and helping professionals and what they're passionate about in order to provide you with messages of encouragement and hope. I'm your host, Andrew Earl. The Mind of a Therapist is sponsored by Psychological Counseling Services, healing hearts and transforming lives. Look into our intensive at pcsearl.com. In today's interview, I interviewed Dr. Alyson Nerenberg. She's a nationally known licensed psychologist who combines 30 years of clinical expertise and training with a warm heart. She's a positive person who loves to help others tap into their own courage and wisdom. Dr. Nerenberg has been featured on television networks, including MSNBC News, ABC, CBS, Fox, and as well as many newspapers and talk shows. Visit her website, which I'll link in the show notes, to find Dr. Nerenberg's new book, No Perfect Love, which we'll talk about in the episode, as well as blogs and more. So without further ado, here's the interview with Dr. Nerenberg. Dr. Nerenberg, thanks for being on the podcast today. Appreciate it.
Oh, I'm so happy to be here.
Yeah, so the first question I've been posing to most of my guests is, how do you view change? What does it take for an individual, a family, couple to really make lasting change happen?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm a believer. I'm a believer in change. I don't think that any of us are stuck in or stagnant in any one way. I believe that we all have the capacity to grow and to change. And our struggle sometimes is when we get stuck in our ways. But I do believe change is possible.
Yeah. And what would you say is the recipe for change, or how does one go about making change in their life?
I believe in the one day at a time theory. I believe in, if we think, oh, I've got to make this huge change, it's overwhelming. But if we think, all right, I can do small changes just for today, and then today turns into tomorrow, and then tomorrow turns into the next day. So I'm about little changes.
Ah, well, that's great. So you've recently come out with a book, or somewhat recently, right? No Perfect Love. Be curious to hear what was the impetus for writing this book.
It was something I always wanted to do. I've always wanted to write a book. I was that little girl that grew up keeping a journal. I was somebody who always wrote, and I always had this dream of writing, but life got busy. I have 3 kids. I work as a psychologist in a private practice, and I just never thought I'd have the time. And going with what I was saying about change, if I thought it's overwhelming, I'm going to sit here and write a book. But I thought, okay, I can write a blog post. So I did one blog post after another. And during the pandemic, I got a bunch of my blog posts together. And my husband said, if you don't do this now during a pandemic, when are you ever going to write your book? And so I sent it to a friend of mine, and I said, I don't know if this is a book or not, but I just know I'm so happy writing these blog posts. I'm feeling creative and doing something I haven't done before. And he said, well, why don't we send it to a friend of mine who's an editor, and he'll give you an honest answer if he thinks there's material for a book. So I took my, I think it was 10 blog posts, and sent it to him, and he said, yeah, this is a book. And I said, I don't even know what the theme is. And he shared with me that I was writing this book without even knowing I was writing it. I was writing it about letting go of trying to be perfect, or the struggle to expect perfection in our relationships.
Yeah. Well, and I love the thesis of your book, that there is not perfection in relationships. Will you talk a bit about, you write about the origins of this perfectionism? Will you speak a bit about, the origins of perfectionism, how that comes about in one's life and one's relationship?
Yeah, I think it comes across differently for a lot of people, but I think that we grow up in families often with addiction. I know I did. I'm a daughter of a recovering alcoholic, and I grew up in a family where my role was to be perfect and to keep our family looking perfect. And I grew up learning to look good. I learned to, never let them see you sweat, and, always put on a good front, and no matter what is going on. And I think that our culture really facilitates that by saying, with Instagram and Facebook, and everything is so visible and looking perfect, and the image is everything.
Hmm. Yeah, thanks for sharing a bit about your own story there. And I'm curious what sort of effect that had on you, growing up with that perfectionist. What was that like? How did that impact your life and your relationships?
In some ways, it was really good. I learned how to take care of people. I was very good at taking care of my brother. I was very good at being the therapist in the family. There was a lot of positives that came from that. But I learned also how to put on a front at times and not ask for help, and some good and some bad.
Sure, sure. And what did what did it look like as you started to recognize the perfectionism and then kind of process through it, deal with it in your adult life?
I grew up in a family where my mom was made everything look easy and perfect. She was very good at managing tasks and keeping things together. And I grew up the same way. I learned how to keep all the balls up in the air. I could entertain, I could watch the kids, I could work, I was tired. I got
Mm,
really irritated from trying to keep all the balls up in the air so much. So part of my job was to say, all right, I'm tired. I'm letting my husband take some of the balls so I don't
mm,
have to do everything.
yeah. And was there like a turning point for you where you kind of reached this point of exhaustion and you started handing that off to, was it kind of a gradual process or how did that look?
In some ways, it happened about, I guess, 5 years ago. We had a son, who our youngest, who had some learning issues and dyslexia, and so things weren't perfect, and it was hard for our system. Our two older daughters really had looked really good, and it was easy to parent them, and my son was more challenging, and it became I took on the challenges, and it was hard. So my husband and I were going through a period that we weren't getting along as well, and we had to really come together and make some changes. And I joked that I took my summer off. I stopped cooking as much. I stopped trying to, please everybody. I had been in a car accident where I was doing too many things, and I wasn't paying attention to what I needed to pay attention to, which is my own sleep, my own self-care. And that was I call it my come to Jesus moment, but my
Mm,
moment when I realized needed to slow down and not try to keep all the balls up in the air and make everything look perfect.
mm. So that was right after the car accident then, that come to
Yeah,
Jesus moment?
I think so. Yeah.
Mm. And yeah, I'm hearing you've been able to slow down and hand some of these tasks off to your husband that in the past you would have just tried to continue to juggle and would have been pretty exhausting if you continued down that path.
Very much so. And it also for him was good because he could step up and was able to be the father to our son who really needed him. So
Yeah.
it was really we worked together, and which was really positive. And it was, for me, slowing down. I would say that I was successful at this until I look at this past year and writing a book. Then I've been speeding up, but I'm a work in progress, right?
Sure, as we all are. Yeah. So you I was reading you wrote this expectation. We have expectations of perfection from other people. Will you talk a bit about how that shows up with some of the couples who consult you and yeah, in romantic relationships?
Very much so. People usually come to see me when they have some sort of crash, whether it's a husband who's an addict, whether it's their own addiction, whether it's having a child who has some issues, when their life crashes down. And part of my job is saying, all right, this is when the real work starts. This is when we can, develop a different type of relationship, a more honest, a more vulnerable, a relationship where you ask for help, where you don't try to be a superhero, but you admit your own vulnerability and humanness.
Absolutely. And I've been reading You're the One You've Been Waiting For by Dick Schwartz, and he talks about this similar theme of we have different projects that we go into with our spouses of at times, like trying to change them. Another is trying to change ourselves for the other person, and then another is withdrawing. And I'm curious, with your clinical experience, your research, does this match up, and is it something that you see often?
It does. I mean, I look at it as little girls and little boys will grow up in this world where there's fairy tales, where we're looking for, Prince Charming or this princess. And then we look at TV shows in our culture like The Bachelor or The Bachelorette, where it takes it finding the perfect spouse and really puts it in a competition. I mean, it's just the expectation of you're finding this person who's going to rescue you.
Yeah.
Or that if you find this person, you can rescue them, that you're going to have a value for fixing or changing or being perfect. You get that A+, and there's really no such thing.
Yeah. Yeah, as I'm hearing you speak there, and as I've been reading Dick Schwartz's book, I've really been, as although cognitively I've come to understand, that there are these dominant messages in our society of, I'm thinking of all the Disney films I watched growing up where there's the happy fairy tale ending, right? And you end up with the prince or the princess, and all of your problems are solved once you find that spouse. And it's just so prevalent in our media. So although I've had, a cognitive understanding of this for quite some time, in reading this book, I realized, how there's this maybe subconscious part of me with my wife that has had pretty high expectations for her, and kind of viewed, I think younger parts of me that experienced pain and loneliness kind of had this expectation that once I got married, right, once I found her, then they would be safe, right? I wouldn't be burdened anymore. But it's been really convicting for me to be like, well, actually, I have had some unfair expectations for her to change. And I love your message of no relationship is perfect, right? We need to embrace the imperfection in our relationships, and in doing so, we can step into more intimacy.
Well, and I look at it in my writing wasn't just about romantic relationships. It's also about our relationships with our children, our relationships with our coworkers, our relationships with our friends. I often remember looking for that perfect friend, that best friend who'll understand me and be there for me. And really, there's no one perfect friend. There's some friends you can have fun with. There's some friends who you can have deep conversations with. There's some friends who can understand you professionally. There's lots of room for different people in your life. And, if you put all your expectations in any one person, you're going to be disappointed.
Yeah. Well, that's really well put. And yeah, that's another piece for me that I'm continually working on, is really strengthening those relationships with my friend network, because in our society, I think it's so easy to go to work, you come home, you spend time with your spouse, your family, and then I know for me, I just want to relax and not always put the extra effort in to, connect with friends who I already have, who have been really supportive to me. But I think of we're tribal creatures, aren't we? We grew up in relationships with a tribe, and that was safety. And I think there's something to having that diversity of friends to fall back on when as we're going through life.
Exactly. The connections and community, it's so important.
Absolutely. Um, Curious if there's anything else that's coming to your mind right now. Anything you've been thinking about lately that's been of interest?
Yeah. So I guess as we're talking about it, I realize that, we're all on this planet to grow. And so often when I see couples who are struggling and want to leave the relationship the first time they get hurt, that they say, "Oh, I'm out of here. I'm going to find somebody better or who, so I won't be hurt." And then they find another partner and the same thing happens. It's so important to look at yourself and say, all right, what's my piece? I say nobody gets out of relationships unscathed. We all get hurt. And it's what we do with those hurts, how we learn from them, how we grow. That's important.
Absolutely. Do you have some tools or some recommendations that you give to people for that process of looking inward? Because I know for me, when I'm, especially when I'm flooded emotionally, it's easy for me to just point the finger at the person that's triggering to me. You
Yeah.
have any strategies for kind of turning the other way?
As you're talking, the two words that come up for me the most are forgiveness and gratitude.
Hmm.
And I wrote about them together, but forgiveness is so crucial. It's forgiving people for making mistakes, for hurting you. It's letting go of resentments that are keeping you stuck.
Hmm.
And gratitude is recognizing what you have, recognizing the gifts you have. And if you're of a spiritual nature, realizing that you got them for a reason from a higher power, from God, and realizing how fortunate you are to have some grace and to have some of these gifts.
Hmm.
I
Yeah.
think those are two really important tools. Another tool I use with my couples often is I ask them in each session, what have you done that has helped your relationship this week? And that usually throws them off because they're coming in to complain or to say,
Sure.
partner, but what have you done that really was good? What has your partner done that's really been great?
Yeah.
And it changes the way they're thinking about their partner and they're thinking about themselves and they're looking at their relationship and the strengths.
Yeah.
And then I say, what have you done that's hurt your relationship this past week? And it kind of normalizes the fact that we all do behaviors that aren't in line with our highest self
Yeah.
and aren't, our best.
Yeah.
And what can we do better? What can we work on?
Mm.
So it's owning our piece of what wasn't perfect. And that's okay.
Yeah. I love that holding space for what is working, what has helped in the relationship, because I think as a field at large, we have often tended to focus on just what's problematic, what's not working, but then also holding space and normalizing behaviors that aren't in line with how one wants to be in relationship and taking an honest look at that.
So instead of pathologizing, it's looking at our strengths, looking at what we have, looking at the love, looking at the compassion.
Hmm. Yeah, I did an interview with Dr. Headkey, and she talks about how in her work she's looking for love stories, whether it's a couple, of family, and her work is focused around grief. What were those, even if, the person who is lost, there was a lot of pain and, trauma maybe in your relationship with them, were there also moments of connection and love, and to hold space to highlight that along with the pain?
I totally agree in what she's saying with loss. And I often talk about what Dr. Pauline Boss talked about was ambiguous loss. And what that is, it's the loss that happens that people don't think of. you think of grieving and you think, oh, it's when a family member dies. And I think when a family member dies, there's often a burial, there's a funeral, there's coming together, people send grievance cards. But if there's a change in a relationship, whether it's a divorce, a separation, an addiction, whether there's an affair, there's a lot of grieving, but it's more private. And there's this shame of this frozen grief that doesn't get expressed, that just gets stuck within your body.
Yeah.
And sometimes it can come as aches and pains and somaticizing, but other times it just comes with you not feeling your emotions.
Yeah.
And so I think grieving is really important. It's recognizing, okay, the perfect story I thought I was holding is no longer here. What do I do next? How do I cope when my illusions are shattered?
Yeah. And what message do you give for that person, or what process do you work through with that person who's experiencing that ambiguous loss?
Yeah. So part of it is, okay, this is where the 12 steps come in, but it's a lot of it is one day at a time. A lot of it is, okay, we're going to make progress, not perfection. We're going to look at what's we can work on building. We can look at supports here, and this is hard, and sometimes you just have to feel the feelings and forgive yourself. Forgive yourself for not seeing what was in front of you. Forgive yourself for being hurt, for being vulnerable, for coping the best you could with the way you were raised and the messages that you did take on.
Yeah. Yeah, you touched on that forgiveness piece again, and I'd be curious if you could share a story of maybe someone who's consulted you, or maybe a friend, or of yourself, of the power of forgiveness, and what that can look like with someone's healing journey.
So I guess, for me, I guess, and the story is personal. I'll tell about my own family. When I went to write this book, I had shared it with my family. Hey, I'm with my parents. I'm writing this book and I want to share it and I want you to read it. Make sure you feel comfortable with it. And everybody was great about it. And then they got scared. And my dad said, well, wait a second. You're telling everybody I'm in recovery. This is my personal stuff. And I said, but you've told everybody. You told my husband back the first day I went on a date with him and you met him. Like, we're talking 26 years ago. This is something that's been part of our family that we've talked about. And there became fear. I'm going to be exposed, and and maybe you shouldn't write this book. So all of a sudden I had this family drama going on. And I said, well, wait a second, this was hard for me because I'm a people pleaser and I want everything to be okay. And I have that therapist part within me. And so it was a little bit of a personal struggle. And my dad said, he said, I'm sorry I put you through this. This if this can help one person, I want to do it.
Wow.
Because yeah. So for me, and it reminded me with him how when he did make a mistake, he would say, I'm sorry. And to living in recovery was such a positive message, and living his life apologizing when he has done something wrong or said something wrong or reacted. And it was a healing moment. He left me this voicemail that was really, I'm really sorry. And it was just, to me, I must have played it 3 or 4 times, but it was just so present. And for me, when you apologize, the important part, and I never really put it into words until now, is it's being present. It's really saying, hey, I'm sorry in this moment for anything I did that caused additional stress.
Wow. You can feel that, can't you, when someone is present and giving that authentic and heartfelt apology, and not minimizing, what they've done, but really, yeah, acknowledging just.
Well, and for me, I had a choice. I was trained as a psychodynamic psychologist, where we're supposed to keep our own, good face on and not share about our own experiences. But so much of my work as a therapist and so much of who I am as a healer is using my own experience, is using that, what I've learned in my marriage of being married for 26 and a half years. Of so much of it is in my parenting, so much of it is in myself. And when I thought of writing a book without using any of my experiences, which is what my family had initially asked me to do, it just didn't feel genuine and authentic. So I felt like I had to make a decision. Do I please people, or am I true to myself and, be more genuine? And I felt like I wanted to be in my own integrity. And once I made that decision, it was great that my family agreed and fell into line about it. But, it was a risk of putting yourself out there and being vulnerable. And even when I do an interview with you in this moment, I could keep it really clinical and talk about all the patients I've worked with and, almost 30 years of being a therapist, or I could share what I've learned and where I've hurt and where I've grown. And I'd rather be genuine and authentic any day of the week.
Yeah. And I know that I appreciate that in my conversation with you right now. And in, the podcast I listen to, and in this podcast, the podcast I enjoy, it's generally there's that authenticity, sharing of one's own experience, because yeah, I think it's really powerful for therapists to talk about the theory and their clinical orientation and clinical experience, but it's as powerful, more powerful, I think, to hear directly from lived experience.
The first way is much more safe. You're going to talk about theories, you're going to keep it a little bit more distanced. But I think what really helps me connect with my patients is when, and it's not even my sharing my own history, but it's being present for them in the room, letting them know I hear them, I'm here, I'm with them in their pain, they're not alone in it, and I want them to heal. I think that really matters for my patients to know that I'm not that blank screen that dynamic therapist I was trained to be. I'm in it with them, and I'm going to be cheering for my couples when things go well, and I'm going to be tearing up sometimes when it's not going well, and I'm in it with them.
Yeah. For those of our listeners who are in a romantic relationship, I mean, all of our listeners are in an intimate relationship of some sort.
Yeah.
Do you have any tools, tips, advice for, let's say couples in specific who are dealing with like a cycle of conflict? What are some first steps you would suggest someone take in addressing those?
So first thing is self-care. First thing is taking care of yourself, whether it's being out spending time in nature, whether it's exercise. For me, I play a lot of tennis. I do this Peloton thing a lot. I do, I like to take hikes. I'm outside a lot, and I feel like that's really healing. I Journaling is something I really believe in. I feel like it's, staying on your side of the street. Really, what can you do to take care of you so that it's not somebody else's job? And then, with each person, it's also taking risks and being vulnerable and saying, this is hard for me and this is a struggle. And I'm sorry deeply. I mean, when I stepped on your toes, or when I said something wrong, or when I did something wrong.
Absolutely. Yeah, that self-care piece of what is it that really refuels you and is going to take care of yourself, so that yeah, that's not your spouse's responsibility. And then yeah, I love this theme throughout this conversation of apology and forgiveness, like the importance of that in a relationship. And will you share, you talked about gratitude earlier, will you share a bit about how gratitude shows up in your, maybe shown up in your own life, your clinical experience as a helpful tool as well?
Yeah. a good experience of gratitude. Well, I have it each day. I have it when I wake up. I have it when I talk to my kids and they make me laugh. I have my my daughter is in Barcelona, and she's doing a semester abroad. And when I spoke to her, and I'm just hearing, like, she's been there for only 1 week, but there's just so much awe as she's seeing this city. And she's spent the whole summer waitressing and saving her money to be able to travel as much as she can on weekends. And she's, and I just hear the excitement, and I'm so grateful that she's having this experience. And that I spoke to her right before this, and I just heard the wonder in her about traveling and seeing the world, and she has my wanderlust. So it's just I'm living a little vicariously from her.
Sure. Oh,
Yeah.
that's nice.
Yeah. But I feel gratitude for my son. I feel, having had a child who's had a reading disability and having had some struggles in his learning, like when he makes the littlest bit of progress, I am so excited for him. And he just went back to school, to his middle school, and he had a great first day yesterday. And he had gone for the past 2 years during the pandemic. I sent him to a private school to get some extra help with reading. And he was kind of lonely. It wasn't great. It was great for him academically, but socially not so great. So to see him feeling happy and to have had lunch with his friends and to feel like everybody remembered his name from the 2 years ago, and just to feel loved, it's like I was so grateful to come home from work yesterday and hear about his day, and just like be a witness and feel like we made the right decision to move him back to public school and to where he feels comfortable. So that was like this huge moment of gratitude. And my oldest is coming in. She's just graduated college, so she's coming in today, and I'm with her boyfriend tonight, and I'm just so grateful to see them. So I get a lot of just being with my kids.
That's so great. And I'm hearing this space you create with your children where you listen to them and hear their emotion and excitement and pain, and really
Yeah.
hold space for them. And that's beautiful.
It,
Yeah.
it's funny, as I'm realizing I'm talking with you, I'm talking so much about my own personal life as opposed to my professional. And I have seen a lot of patients, and my heart opens up for them as well. But there's something about my growth as being a parent and being a wife that is really a part of me. And I think they get that eternal piece from me.
No, well, I appreciate you sharing, and unfortunately, we're about at the end of the hour here. So, I have a last question that I generally ask guests, but before we get to that, where can people find your work? Where's a good place to direct them if they're interested in getting your book, learning more about your work?
Yeah, great. No Perfect Love. You can order it on Amazon. You can Barnes and Noble or any indie bookstore, hopefully. But I have a website, www.healingrelationshipspa for Pennsylvania.com.
Perfect. And I'll link all that in the show notes for the listeners who are interested. The final question that I ask guests is, what's a message of hope that you'd like to leave our listeners with today?
So I guess my message of hope, this may sound generic, but I really believe that healing is possible. To me, the reason we're all on this planet is to love and be loved. Simple as that. So what I'd like to tell listeners is to keep allowing love in their hearts, and keep taking chances, and keep taking healthy risks, and believing that change is possible and that healing is possible.
That's beautiful. And I know from my own personal experience, it can seem really pessimistic when you're in a place of stuckness, but that message is so important to keep moving and keep allowing space for love and for change and new possibilities, because they will come. It's just a matter of time.
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely.
Well, thanks so much for being on the podcast today. I appreciate it.
This was so much fun. I really enjoyed talking to you, and hopefully it was helpful to you and your viewers.
Absolutely. Please press the subscribe button, as well as rating and reviewing our podcast. This helps others connect with what you've been hearing. If you have any questions, please contact us at themindofatherapist@gmail.com. These questions will be kept anonymous. I want to thank Eric Price for the wonderful music you hear in this podcast. Additionally, this podcast was created to provide accurate and authoritative information on the subject matter. Although we are interviewing licensed therapists, they are not your therapists. This podcast is not intended to serve as direct medical advice and should not be used as a substitute for direct professional help. It is given with the understanding that neither the host, publisher, guests, or PCS are rendering legal, clinical, or other professional information. If you need a professional, we encourage you to find one. Visit Psychology Today to connect with a licensed clinician near you.